Welcome to Suthichai Live English Podcast. Thailand has presented a revised proposal to the Trump administration, aiming to boost U.S. imports and subsequently to reduce its trade surplus with the U.S. within 7 to 8 years. The original proposal was for 10 years to reduce or to equalize trade balance between the two countries. After his meeting with the USTR, Deputy Prime Minister Pichai Chunawachira of Thailand has improved on the terms, or in other words, has increased concessions to the U.S. side. The strategy includes offering a greater market access to U.S. goods, purchasing U.S. energy and Boeing jets, and implementing a more rapid timeline for balancing trade. The Thai proposal highlights Thailand's goal of securing a lower tariff rate. The reciprocal tariff rate for Thailand imposed by the Trump administration on April the 2nd was 36%. Now, Thailand aims to ideally reduce it to between 10 to 20% because other Asian countries such as Vietnam have already negotiated some deals. Ultimately, a favorable agreement is crucial for Thailand's trade development and also to be able to prevent any serious consequences. At the same time, Thailand will also try to avoid a situation where it sits and waits for a letter from President Trump, as he has threatened to do with a lot of countries which have not reached an agreement with the U.S. Now let's see what exactly has Thailand decided in the new proposal and whether it will eventually help President Trump and his team to agree to a lower tariff rates. Let's get Ping and Pong to dig into that. Hi, Ping and Pong.
Welcome to Suthichai Live English Podcast. I am Ping.
And I am Pong, Suthichai's news team.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here to really plunge into those complex global stories, pull out the key insights, help you get truly well informed. Today, we're looking at a really high-stakes situation. It's unfolding right now in global trade, and it's reaching, a critical point for a major Asian economy, Thailand. We're examining Thailand's urgent efforts, and really last-minute efforts to avoid hitting a huge U.S. tariff deadline. The stakes are just immense. They're staring down potentially a 36% export levy. That's the threat from the Trump administration. So, okay, let's unpack this. The core question for our deep dive today is this. Is Thailand still, actively negotiating? Are they on a list that might get them a bit more time past that July 9th deadline? Or, and this is the crucial part, if this new proposal they just sent isn't accepted, are they basically just waiting by the mailbox for what people are calling a Trump letter, the one spelling out those tariffs? It's a real race against the clock, and honestly, the outcome could send ripples far beyond just trade numbers. Oh, absolutely. It truly is a race against time, and you can almost feel the urgency coming out of Bangkok. It's palpable. What's fascinating here is just how critical that date, July 9th, has become. It's the exact end of that 90-day tariff pause President Trump announced earlier. And like you said, he's been pretty clear he intends to start sending out the first batch of letters, the ones detailing specific tariff rates, right around then. So for a country like Thailand, so dependent on trade, with this incredibly tight timeline, the implications of getting one of those letters or managing to avoid it are just profound.
Profound is definitely the word. Let's really focus on that threat for a second. That 36% number, it's not just a figure, right? It could be an economic tidal wave. Thailand is scrambling. Where does this pressure actually come from? Why Thailand specifically? Well, it basically stems directly from the trade balance, or rather the imbalance. Thailand currently has a pretty big trade surplus with the U.S., about $46 billion. And, in the view of the current U.S. administration, that kind of imbalance is something that needs fixing. Tariffs are the tool, the leverage they're using to push for that rebalancing. It's a direct response to that deficit figure.
Okay, so $46 billion, that's the target. And to deal with that, Bangkok has apparently made a really dramatic countermove. People are calling it a last-ditch effort. Can you break down what's actually in this latest revised proposal?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just a minor tweak. This is a seriously ambitious plan, and it's accelerated. This revised proposal, they submitted it just this past Sunday night, literally days before the July 9th deadline. That shows you the urgency.
Yeah.
It seems to target two main things. First, boosting overall trade between the U.S. and Thailand, just more volume. But critically, they've pledged to slash that $46 billion surplus by, get this, 70% within just 5 years. 70%. And what's maybe even more aggressive is the new timeline for achieving full trade balance. They're now aiming for 7 to 8 years. Remember, their earlier promise was more like a decade. So this is a huge speeding up of their commitment, shows real intent.
Wow. Okay, 70% in 5 years, balance in 7 or 8. That is a dramatic acceleration. Their finance minister, Pichai Chanavajira, he's been quite upfront about this. What are the immediate things they're putting on the table? And what's the sort of longer-term plan here?
Right, Pichai's laid it out pretty clearly. If the U.S. accepts this, Thailand is offering immediately to waive import tariffs or other non-tariff barriers for a majority of U.S. products. Think broad, quick market access. That's the immediate hit. Then for a smaller group of goods, presumably the more sensitive ones where their local industries might feel the pinch, they're promising a gradual phase out of restrictions. So it's like a two-speed approach. Acknowledges their own economic sensitivities, but still aims to meet the U.S. demands.
That sounds like a pretty carefully thought out strategy. But okay, playing devil's advocate, from the U.S. side, what's the real carrot here? Beyond just seeing that trade deficit number go down, what's this mutually beneficial angle Pichai keeps mentioning?
Yeah, and this is where it gets quite strategic, I think. Pichai's argument is, look, this isn't just Thailand giving things up. It's genuinely mutually beneficial. He points out that a lot of the U.S. products that would get better access, they're actually things Thailand needs more of locally. They're in short supply there. And that's the key bit. It means these imports aren't necessarily going to hammer their own farmers or producers. They're kind of filling an existing gap in the domestic supply. So you see, it's framed as a win-win. Thailand gets to fix some of its own supply chain issues, maybe cut some red tape, streamline things, while also giving the U.S. the increased market access it wants. Pichai actually said, what we're offering them is a mutually beneficial proposal. The U.S. can trade more with us, and we get to the chance to clean up our process and cut red tapes. It's quite clever, really. Using external pressure to justify internal reforms that might have been needed anyway makes the deal potentially more sustainable than just pure concessions.
That is clever, turning a demand into almost an opportunity for domestic improvement. Smart. And it's not just about market access for goods, is it? Thailand's also made what Pichai called aggressive adjustments commercially. We're talking big ticket items like commitments to buy U.S. energy, LNG, specifically in Boeing planes. Can you give us some specifics there? These sound like huge deals.
Oh, they absolutely are huge. And importantly, they aren't just vague promises. These seem to be concrete commitments tied to specific Thai companies and pretty large volume. So, for instance, you've got two big Thai petrochemical players, CG Chemicals and PTT Global Chemical. They apparently pledged to import significantly more U.S. ethane. That's a major feedstock. Then, maybe even bigger news, PTT, the state-controlled energy giant, has apparently floated an offer to buy 2 million tons of LNG each year from that Alaska gas project. And not just for a year or two over a 20-year term, but that's a massive long-term commitment. They're even talking about potentially co-developing the Alaska project itself. That's serious investment. Yeah. And then, on the aviation side, Thai Airways, the national airline, has signaled interest in buying as many as 80 Boeing jets, 80. So you add all that up, long-term gas deals, potential project co-development, with a huge aircraft order, you're talking billions and billions in future U.S. exports locked in.
Okay, those are truly enormous commitments. How do these specific, very large commercial deals, the LNG, the Boeings, how do they really lift Thailand's offer beyond just, symbolic gestures? How do they prove genuine commitment?
Well, they do it by being direct, measurable, and very impactful on the bottom line, right? These aren't just policy changes that might filter through over time. These are immediate or near-term commercial agreements that will directly and very substantially shift the trade balance numbers in the U.S.'s favor. It shows a long-term, tangible commitment. It's not just a promise to maybe adjust some regulations later. It's basically Thailand saying, look, we're willing to put serious money down right now. And that significantly strengthens their hand in these negotiations. It's hard evidence.
Right. Real money talks, essentially. And these weren't just proposals sent over email, were they? There were high-level talks involved. Who met who, and why were those meetings important?
Exactly. Finance Minister Pichai himself flew over and recently met with key U.S. officials. Specifically, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and also Deputy Treasury Secretary Michael Faulkner. And what makes these meetings particularly significant is that they were billed as the first ministerial-level tariff talks between the two countries on this issue. That tells you how seriously Thailand is taking this, sending their top economic minister to Washington right before the deadline. It signals extreme gravity and urgency. It bumps the whole conversation up from technical staff level to high-stakes political diplomacy.
That's a huge indicator of seriousness, yeah. Underscores the pressure on both sides, really. And, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Thailand's not doing this in a vacuum, are they? It's not just a U.S.-Thailand thing. It feels like part of a much larger pattern. Thailand is just one of several countries kind of frantically trying to cut a deal with the U.S. right now. Didn't we just see Vietnam reach an agreement?
You're absolutely right. Thailand is definitely not alone in this sprint to the finish line. There are multiple countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, but elsewhere too, racing against similar deadlines, trying to finalize deals and dodge these potentially steep tariffs. And yes, neighboring Vietnam did secure a deal just last week. Now, it's worth noting, while they avoided maybe the worst-case scenario, President Trump still announced a 20% tariff on their exports. And crucially, a 40% rate on goods the U.S. deems are being transshipped, basically. Stuff routed through Vietnam to try and avoid tariffs placed on other countries, like China. So that Vietnam example is really telling. It shows the range of possible outcomes, and it highlights the immense pressure these countries are under to negotiate the best terms they can possibly get, or at least find out quickly what kind of letter they might be facing. It really is like a high-stakes poker game, and everyone's watching to see who folds and who gets a deal.
Okay, so given all that context, what are the real concrete economic consequences for Thailand if they don't get a deal by July 9th? Or if the U.S. looks at this aggressive new proposal and says, nope, not good enough?
Well, the stakes for Thailand's economy are incredibly high. Let's be clear about that. If they fail to get a reduced tariff, or if they can't avoid that full 36% whack on exports to their biggest market, well, you'd expect to see a sharp, pretty immediate drop in their merchandise shipments. And that would have a direct, measurable, and quite painful hit on their overall economic growth. Some analysts are already projecting it could shave as much as 1 full percentage point off Thailand's economic growth forecast. And those forecasts weren't exactly stellar to begin with. Finance Minister Pichai himself has been pretty open about their target. He said they're pushing for a best-case rate of 10%. And even a range of 10% to 20% would be considered, well, acceptable, though obviously still damaging. He put it very starkly, actually. He said, the worst thing that can happen is we get the worst deal out of our regional neighbors. That really tells you about the competitive pressure they feel. It's not just about the U.S. It's about how they stack up against Vietnam, Malaysia, and others also negotiating.
Wow, that quote really drives home the regional competition aspect. Getting a lower U.S. tariff rate, then. It's not just about dodging a penalty. It sounds absolutely critical for shielding Thailand's economy, especially since it's already, facing some headwinds. What are those existing vulnerabilities?
Precisely. It's crucial because their growth is already under quite a bit of strain. That makes this potential tariff shock even more dangerous for them. Thailand is currently dealing with the highest household debt levels in Southeast Asia. That puts a real damper on domestic spending, on consumption. So you combine that with generally sluggish internal demand, and their economy is already feeling the pressure, even before any new U.S. tariffs come into play. And there's a domestic political angle, too. Getting a favorable deal with the U.S. would actually help calm investor nerves. Those nerves have been jangled recently by political uncertainty in Thailand, particularly after the Prime Minister, Paetongtarn Shinawatra, was suspended by the court over allegations related to a border issue with Cambodia. So you see, getting a decent trade outcome isn't just about the external economic numbers. It's also about trying to shore up internal stability and investor confidence during a pretty sensitive period. It's all interconnected: foreign policy, trade, domestic politics.
That is a really complex web of factors they're navigating. It seems almost counterintuitive then. But despite all these threats looming, Thailand's exports actually jumped, about 15% in the first 5 months of this year? That seems like good news amidst all the gloom. What's driving that?
Yeah, it looks good on the surface, but that surge is mostly down to something called front-loading. Basically, during that 90-day tariff pause, businesses scrambled. They rushed to ship as much stuff as possible to the U.S. before those potential high tariffs could kick in. They were trying to beat the deadline. So it created this kind of artificial short-term spike in the export numbers. It's a temporary bump, unfortunately, and it really masks the very significant underlying risk that still exists long-term. And going back to that waiting for a letter idea you raised, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent did recently suggest that some countries, even if they don't have a final deal locked down by July 9th, might still get a chance to keep negotiating, maybe until the tariffs actually take effect, which could be August 1st. So that adds yet another layer of, uncertainty and potential nuance to that July 9th deadline. It might not be absolutely final for everyone.
Okay, so this raises a really important question then, doesn't it? This very detailed, very aggressive proposal Thailand submitted literally at the 11th hour. How does that actually position them in this sort of multi-stage negotiation process? What are the real chances they can avoid getting that immediate tariff letter? Can they maybe secure a spot in that potential August 1st negotiation window instead?
That is the critical question right now, isn't it? It's the core uncertainty. I think the sheer aggressiveness of Thailand's revised offer, the scale of the surplus reduction pledge, the speed, those huge commercial commitments we talked about, plus the fact they had those high-level ministerial talks right before the deadline, all of that strongly suggests Thailand is making a very, very proactive case for itself. They're clearly signaling, hey, we're serious, we're engaged, keep talking to us. They want to be seen as actively negotiating, not just passively waiting for a verdict. Their hope, presumably in Bangkok, is that this very visible, substantial effort, the tangible economic value they're putting on the table, will be enough. Enough to keep them at the negotiating table past July 9th, rather than just getting lumped in with countries receiving a final tariff notification letter. It's definitely a calculated risk, pushing so hard right at the end. But given the enormous stakes, it seems like a risk they felt they absolutely had to take.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener, as you try to follow these, frankly, quite complex twists and turns in global trade? It means we are literally watching a cliffhanger play out in real time. Thailand has thrown down the gauntlet with an incredibly aggressive, detailed offer. Huge commercial deals are on the table. All of this is happening against that hard July 9th deadline. And the possibility of either getting that direct tariff notification from the U.S. or maybe securing a vital extension for more talks, well, it hangs right there in the balance.
Yeah.
It's a genuine high-stakes race against time, and the outcome will have massive consequences, not just for Thailand's economy, but potentially for the stability of the whole Southeast Asian region.
Yeah, and this whole situation really pushes us to think a bit more deeply about the dynamics of international trade talks, especially when they happen under this kind of intense unilateral pressure. What does Thailand's very proactive, very comprehensive approach tell us about how countries, particularly export-heavy ones, are learning to walk that tightrope, defending their own economic interests while also having to adapt to these rapidly shifting, sometimes unpredictable global trade demands? It really raises a fundamental question, doesn't it? What are the long-term lessons we can draw from these kinds of, last-ditch, but also quite sophisticated efforts, not just for Thailand, but for any nation that might find itself facing similar tariff threats down the line in this changing world? How much can a country ultimately concede to try and protect its economy? And what are the lasting costs, maybe hidden costs, of making those kinds of compromises under pressure? It's something worth mulling over.
Thank you for following Suthichai Live English Podcast. We try to offer you analysis that is important for understanding Thailand's situation. We also cover ASEAN and the region because we believe that consistent and objective analysis of the economic, political, and security situations in Asia is important for understanding this growing region. Thank you. Until the next episode. Bye bye. 1.5 ล้านแล้วครับ 1,500,000 คนผู้ที่ติดตาม Subscribe สุทธิชัย Live ใน YouTube ขอบคุณทุกท่านนะครับที่กดแชร์กดไลค์และขอบคุณเป็นพิเศษสำหรับผู้ติดตามสุทธิชัย Live ใน YouTube ที่กด Super Chat Super Sticker เป็นกำลังใจให้กับทีมงานของผมครับ 1.5 ล้านวันนี้ตั้งเป้า 2 ล้านก่อนสิ้นปีขอบคุณทุกท่านที่ช่วยกันครับ